The sound of the dryer buzzed faintly in the background as I sat on the living room couch, scrolling mindlessly through the endless rabbit hole of Instagram. Lisa was upstairs, probably getting ready for another boutique inventory night. At least that's what she called it. 8 years into marriage, you start to notice things. Subtle shifts. Small, almost imperceptible changes that outsiders wouldn't even register. But I noticed. The way Lisa started guarding her phone, like it held state secrets. The extra 10 minutes she'd spend on her makeup before leaving the house. Even when she said she was just going to the store. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe work stress was getting to me. But then the receipt came out of nowhere. It was wedged in the pocket of Lisa's favorite jeans, the ones she had tossed into the laundry hamper that morning. A tiny slip of paper, but it might as well have been a grenade. Chandler's Bistro. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. The date was last Wednesday. John, you're being paranoid. I muttered under my breath, pacing the living room. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe one of her suppliers from the boutique had taken her out. But I knew better. Lisa rarely drank wine unless we were out together. I stared at the receipt again, the neat little printout mocking me. Chandler's Bistro wasn't some fast food joint. It was an upscale spot we used to frequent when we were dating. I couldn't remember the last time we went there together. That night, as Lisa got ready to leave, I decided to test the waters. Working late again. Huh? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. My tone was casual, but I watched her carefully. Yeah, she said, not looking up from her phone. Inventory. Mallory bailed on me last minute, so it's just me tonight. Mallory was her assistant, a bright-eyed college student who often helped out at the boutique. Her name was the perfect cover for anything Lisa didn't want me to question. You sure you don't want me to come by? Help out or keep you company? Lisa laughed, finally glancing up. What, and get in the way? You'd be bored out of your mind, trust me. The response felt rehearsed, polished like she'd been practicing it for weeks. She grabbed her keys and bag, kissed me on the cheek, and disappeared out the door before I could say another word. The house felt empty without her. Too quiet. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down at the table, staring at her laptop, which she'd left open. Lisa was meticulous about logging out of everything, her email, her social media, even her boutique sales platform. But tonight she'd been in a rush. The browser was still open, and the inbox was staring me in the face. I didn't want to be the guy who snooped. I really didn't. But the receipt and her behavior kept nagging at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. I clicked the tab. Her inbox looked innocent enough: work emails, newsletters from home decor websites, and a few personal messages. But one name stood out immediately: Ethan Hart. It was an old email, buried a few pages back. The timestamp read nearly 6 months ago. A harmless subject line: hope you're doing well. I clicked it. The message was brief, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Hey Lisa, it's been a while. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to check in. Saw some pictures of your boutique online. It looks amazing. Congrats on everything. Anyway, I'd love to catch up sometime if you're open to it. No pressure. Just coffee or something. Let me know. The message didn't mention me. Not once. Just coffee or something. The audacity. My pulse quickened. Ethan Hart. The guy who had the nerve to stay in Lisa's orbit long after we got married. Back when I still thought I was the reasonable, laid-back husband who didn't need to set boundaries. Ethan, who'd told Lisa in a drunken text one night that she deserved better than John. It had taken months of tension, arguments, and one near ultimatum for Lisa to agree to cut him off. Now, 6 months ago, he'd reached out, and she hadn't mentioned it. Had she responded? I scrolled feverishly through the inbox, but there was no reply. Maybe she had ignored it. Maybe. A soft chime from my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. A notification from the family tracking app. Lisa's PIN wasn't at the boutique. I opened the app, my thumb trembling as I zoomed in on the map. She was across town, near the ritzy part of Dallas where all the trendy gyms and high-end cafes were. The boutique was nowhere near there. The beer in my stomach churned as I tried to think of a rational explanation. Maybe she'd decided to stop somewhere before work. Or maybe Mallory really had canceled, and Lisa was grabbing a coffee alone before heading in. I tapped her location again, zooming further in. She was at the Iron Haven, a luxury fitness club we'd never been to. Lisa didn't even like going to the gym. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I stayed up, waiting for her to come home. When she walked in around 11 o'clock, I played it cool, pretending I hadn't been stewing in my thoughts for hours. "How was inventory?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Exhausting," she said, dropping her bag on the floor and slipping off her shoes. "Mallory owes me big time." She kissed me goodnight and went upstairs to shower, leaving me sitting on the couch with a knot in my chest. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Lisa at that gym, laughing with Ethan over smoothies or, God forbid, doing whatever the hell people do when they think no one is watching. Something wasn't adding up, and I was going to find out what. The days that followed were a blur of mounting suspicion. Every glance Lisa gave her phone, every vague excuse about long days at the boutique, felt like a red flag waving in front of my face. But the worst part wasn't her, it was me. I hated what I was becoming. The kind of man who second-guessed his wife's every move, who questioned her loyalty. But the signs were too glaring to ignore. On Tuesday night, Lisa left for another late shift. This time, she dressed up more than usual. A black blouse that hugged her figure just right, paired with skinny jeans and the heels I knew she only wore when she wanted to make an impression. "You're really pulling out all the stops for inventory, huh?" I joked, trying to sound casual as she brushed past me on her way to the door. She gave me a quick smile, not even pausing. "It's just easier to feel put together, you know? Keeps me motivated." And just like that, she was gone again. That night, I decided to take things further. I pulled up the tracking app and watched as Lisa's pin moved away from the house. Sure enough, she wasn't heading toward the boutique. The blue dot zipped down I-75, stopping at the same spot as last time. The Iron Haven gym. I knew I couldn't just sit at home anymore. Grabbing my keys, I drove across town, staying just far enough behind her to avoid suspicion. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked a block away and walked toward the gym's massive glass doors. Inside, the place looked like a luxury hotel lobby. Polished floors, soft lighting, and a juice bar tucked into the corner. I scanned the crowd, searching for Lisa's blonde hair among the sea of fitness enthusiasts. There she was, standing by the front desk, laughing with someone. My blood ran cold when I saw him. Ethan Hart looked exactly as I remembered him. Tall, dark-haired, with that easy charm that made people instantly like him. He was leaning casually against the counter, his gym bag slung over one shoulder, his smile wide as Lisa spoke. She wasn't just smiling back. She was glowing. Her body language screamed comfort, familiarity. I stayed back, hiding behind a column near the entrance, watching as they laughed and chatted like old friends, or more. After a few minutes, they walked toward the stairs leading to the second floor, disappearing from sight. I didn't follow them. Part of me wanted to march up there, demand answers right then and there. But another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew I needed more. The next day, I reached out to a private investigator. His name was Rick, grizzled, no-nonsense, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a 1980s cop show. After a brief phone call, we met at a diner near my office. I slid a picture of Lisa across the table, followed by one of Ethan I'd pulled from Facebook. "My wife," I said, tapping Lisa's photo. "And this guy her ex. I think something's going on between them." Rick studied the photos, nodding slowly. "What's the history here?" "They dated for years before we got married. It's complicated. She promised me she'd cut him out of her life, but now I'm not so sure. I need to know what's happening." Rick jotted a few notes in a small notebook. "What kind of proof are you looking for? Phone records? Pictures? Anything," I said. "Just enough to know if I'm crazy, or if she's lying to me." Over the next week, Rick worked fast. He tailed Lisa on her late-night outings, snapping photos and logging her movements. I tried to act normal at home, but it was getting harder. Every time Lisa smiled at me, I wondered if she was thinking about Ethan. On Friday, Rick called with an update. "I've got something," he said, his voice low and serious. Meet me at my office. Rick's office was a dingy space above a strip mall, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. When I walked in, he handed me a manila envelope. Take a look, he said, leaning back in his chair. Inside were photos of Lisa and Ethan, clear as day. One showed them sitting at a small cafe, their heads close together as they talked. Another showed them walking side by side down a quiet street, Lisa's arm brushing against his. But the worst one, the one that sent a wave of nausea crashing over me, was taken in front of a downtown hotel. They were standing at the entrance, their faces inches apart. It wasn't a kiss, but it might as well have been. She checked in with him last night, Rick said. They were there for about 2 hours. Left separately. I gripped the photos, my knuckles turning white. Did they? Rick shrugged. I can't say for sure, but it doesn't look good. That night I didn't confront Lisa. Couldn't. Instead, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the photos over and over. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When Lisa came home, she found me sitting there, a beer in one hand and the envelope in the other. You okay? She asked, her tone light. I looked up at her, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, just tired. She kissed me on the forehead and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Whatever was happening between her and Ethan, it wasn't just casual. This was deliberate, calculated, and I wasn't going to let it continue. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd aged 10 years overnight. My head was pounding, and my chest felt hollow, like someone had carved out my insides and left me with nothing but the ache. Lisa was already gone, claiming she had an early shipment to handle at the boutique. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos Rick had given me. The images were seared into my brain. Lisa and Ethan smiling, walking close, disappearing into that hotel. The questions swirling in my mind were relentless. Had they been meeting up for months? Was it physical? Or worse, was she falling back in love with him? I couldn't take it anymore. The silence of the house was suffocating, and I needed answers. That evening, I waited for Lisa to come home. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock grating against my nerves. When her car finally pulled into the driveway, I felt my stomach twist into knots. She walked in, her expression calm, even cheerful. Hey you, she said, setting her bag on the counter. What's for dinner? I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood there, gripping the back of one of the kitchen chairs, my knuckles white. Lisa, I said finally, my voice low, we need to talk. She froze, her hand hovering over the faucet as she reached for a glass of water. Slowly, she turned to face me. Okay, she said cautiously. What's going on? I held up the envelope and tossed it onto the counter. The photos spilled out, spreading like a deck of damning cards. What the hell is this? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. Lisa's eyes widened as she stared at the pictures. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she reached for them, her fingers trembling. John, don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare lie to me. I know you've been seeing him. I know about the hotel, the cafe, all of it. So, tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? Lisa's face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she was going to deny everything. But then she exhaled, her shoulders slumping. It's not what you think, she said softly. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. Not what I think. Really? Because it sure looks like you're sneaking around with your ex. The same guy you promised me you'd cut out of your life. So, please enlighten me. What am I supposed to think? Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting to the photos and then back to me. He reached out a few months ago, she admitted. He said he wanted to apologize for everything. How things ended, how he acted when we got married. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd overreact. Overreact, I repeated, my voice rising. You're sneaking around behind my back, meeting him at hotels, and I'm the one overreacting? She flinched at my tone. It wasn't like that. I swear nothing happened. We just talked. Talked? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's what people do at hotels, huh? Talk? Her face flushed with anger. You're not even listening to me. He's been going through a rough time, and he needed someone to talk to. I was just trying to be there for him as a friend. Friend? I shot back. He's not your friend, Lisa. He's your ex. And you didn't just betray me. You betrayed our marriage. You lied to me. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice cracking. I don't know. I didn't think it was a big deal at first. And then what? I demanded. You got caught up in the thrill? The nostalgia? What was it, Lisa? What did he give you that I couldn't? She didn't answer. The silence was deafening. After a long pause, she finally spoke. It wasn't about you, she said quietly. It was about me. I've been feeling lost, stuck, like I'm just going through the motions every day. And when Ethan showed up, it reminded me of a time when I felt alive. I wasn't trying to hurt you, John. You just what? I interrupted, my voice shaking. Needed an ego boost? Needed someone to tell you how amazing you are because I wasn't doing it enough. Her tears spilled over, and she wiped them away angrily. That's not fair. Fair. I laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? How about the fact that I've been here, building a life with you, trusting you, while you were off chasing some fantasy with the one guy I begged you to stay away from? She opened her mouth to respond but stopped when she saw the look on my face. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice hollow. I need some air. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving Lisa standing in the kitchen, her face pale and stricken. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her at her word that nothing physical had happened. But the photos, the secrecy, the lies, how could I trust her again? By the time I returned home, it was past midnight. The house was dark, and Lisa was asleep, or pretending to be. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty fireplace, wondering if our marriage could survive this. Deep down, I already knew the answer. The days following the confrontation were a mixture of cold silences and strained conversations. Lisa tried to act like things were normal, cooking breakfast, asking about my day, but her eyes betrayed her. Guilt hung between us like a storm cloud, dark and oppressive. I couldn't move past it, not with so many unanswered questions. Her explanations felt incomplete, carefully crafted to avoid implicating herself further. Every time I thought about the hotel, the cafe, and Ethan's smug face, my blood boiled. So I decided to take things into my own hands. It started with the letter. I found it by accident while rummaging through the drawer in our bedroom where Lisa kept old receipts and papers. Beneath a pile of folded store invoices was a white envelope, unsealed. My heart sank as I slid the letter out, immediately recognizing her handwriting. Ethan, I can't stop thinking about what we talked about last week. I wish things were simpler, less complicated, but they're not. I know I made promises, and I don't take those lightly. I don't want to hurt anyone, especially John. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe again. Like I'm myself again. Asterisk, I hate lying, but I don't know what else to do. I need more time to figure things out. Please don't give up on me yet. Asterisk. Lisa, the room spun as I reread the letter, each word cutting deeper than the last. She hadn't just betrayed me. She was planning to keep doing it. Figure things out? What did that even mean? Was she weighing her options between me and Ethan like I was some backup plan? My hands shook as I stuffed the letter back into the envelope and returned it to the drawer. I needed to confront her again, but this time I wasn't going in blind. That evening, Rick called with another update. You're not gonna like this, he said grimly. What now? I asked, already bracing myself. She's meeting him tonight, Rick said. Same hotel as before. I can be there if you want backup. I clenched my jaw, fury building inside me. No, I said. I'll handle it myself. The drive to the hotel was a blur. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, adrenaline had taken over. I spotted Lisa's car immediately, parked near the entrance. My stomach churned as I imagined her inside, laughing with Ethan, maybe even worse. I waited in the lobby, pacing back and forth as I scanned the faces of the people walking by. About 15 minutes later, I saw them. Lisa and Ethan stepped off the elevator, their body language casual but far too comfortable. She was smiling at him, that same radiant smile she used to save for me. Ethan had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the door. Something inside me snapped.
Lisa!
I barked, my voice echoing through the lobby. She froze mid-step, her face turning pale as she saw me. Ethan, to his credit, barely flinched. Instead, he smirked, the smug bastard, like he'd been expecting this all along. "John?" Lisa stammered, stepping away from Ethan. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I spat, my voice dripping with venom. "Maybe I should be asking you that question. Or better yet, I could just ask your friend here." Ethan raised his hands in mock surrender, the smirk never leaving his face. "Hey man, I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face after everything you've done." "John, stop," Lisa pleaded, stepping between us. "This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I shot back, glaring at her. "Because it looks like you're sneaking around with the guy I explicitly told you to stay away from. So please, enlighten me. What the hell am I missing?" Her eyes welled with tears, but I wasn't falling for it this time. "Nothing happened," she insisted. "We were just talking. That's all." I turned to Ethan, who looked far too calm for someone caught in the middle of a marital meltdown. "Is that true?" I demanded. He shrugged, his smirk fading slightly. "Lisa's a grown woman, man. She can make her own decisions." "That's not an answer," I snapped, taking another step toward him. "John," Lisa cried, grabbing my arm. "Please, let's just go home and talk about this. Privately." I shook her off, my anger boiling over. "No, we're talking about this now. You want to lie to my face? Fine. But don't expect me to just stand here and take it." Lisa's tears spilled over as she looked between me and Ethan. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Her words hit me like a gut punch. She wasn't denying it anymore. She wasn't even trying to. "You didn't mean for it to get this far," I repeated bitterly. "Great. That makes everything so much better." I turned to Ethan, my fists itching to wipe the smug look off his face. But I knew better than to let him bait me. Instead, I took a step back, my voice cold and steady. "You can have her," I said, my words cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm done." Lisa gasped, but I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of the lobby, my heart pounding as I left the woman I thought I knew behind. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. Lisa called me repeatedly, leaving tearful voicemails begging me to come home, but I ignored every one of them. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not yet. When I left the house that night, I thought it would hurt more. The finality of walking away from Lisa, from the life we'd built together, should have felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But as I drove aimlessly through the quiet Dallas streets, there was nothing but numbness. It wasn't until I pulled into a cheap motel off the highway and collapsed onto the stiff bed that the weight of it all started to sink in. The photos, the letter, her lies. Every betrayal played on a loop in my mind. I couldn't escape it. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney. Her name was Susan Caldwell, and her reputation was as sharp as her legal instincts. "Adultery complicates things," she said after I explained my situation. "But it can also work in your favor if we need leverage. Do you have concrete evidence?" I hesitated for a moment, thinking of the photos Rick had taken and the letter I'd found. "Yeah," I said. "I have proof." "Good," Susan said firmly. "We'll use that if we need to. In the meantime, I'll draft the initial paperwork. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Prepared? I wasn't sure, but I nodded anyway, even though she couldn't see me. The second call was to Rick. "Do me a favor," I said, my voice tense. "I need to know more about Ethan. Anything you can dig up, his job, his relationships, his past. Whatever you find, I want it." Rick didn't ask questions. He simply grunted in acknowledgement and hung up. By the time I returned to the house that evening, Lisa was waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen and red, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "John," she said as soon as I walked in. "Please, we need to talk." I dropped my bag by the door and crossed my arms. "What's there to talk about, Lisa? You cheated. You lied. And now you want to talk." She flinched at my words, but she didn't back down. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just don't leave. Please. Fix it." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You think you can just apologize, and everything will go back to normal? Do you even understand what you've done?" "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish and I made a mistake. But I love you, John. I love our life together. I don't want to lose that." I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. "If you loved me," I said quietly, "you wouldn't have done this in the first place." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I need time," I said, my voice hollow. "Time to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. Because right now, I don't see how we come back from this." Lisa's sobs filled the silence as I walked past her and headed upstairs. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward coexistence. I stayed in the guest room, avoiding Lisa as much as possible while I worked through the logistics of the divorce. She tried to reach out, leaving notes on my pillow, cooking my favorite meals, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was betrayal. Then Rick called with the news that changed everything. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Your wife wasn't the only one Ethan was seeing." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "He's been involved with another woman, a yoga instructor named Marissa. They've been seeing each other for months. Looks like he's been playing both sides." My jaw clenched as I processed the information. "Does Lisa know?" "No idea," Rick said. "But I've got photos if you need them." "Send them to me," I said. When the photos arrived, I felt a strange mix of vindication and fury. There he was, Ethan Hart, the man who'd nearly destroyed my marriage, laughing with another woman, his hand resting possessively on her waist. I printed the photos and tucked them into an envelope, just like the ones Rick had given me before. This time, I wasn't the one being blindsided. That night, I confronted Lisa. "I need to show you something," I said, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. She frowned, confused, as she pulled out the photos. Her face fell as she flipped through them, her hands trembling. "Is this?" she began, her voice trailing off. "Ethan," I said coldly, "your perfect friend. Turns out he wasn't as devoted to you as you thought." Lisa stared at the photos, her expression a mixture of shock and heartbreak. "I didn't know," she whispered. I cut her off. "Of course you didn't. Because he was using you, Lisa, just like he always has. And you let him." Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the photos. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was stupid. I thought he cared." "Well, now you know," I said, my voice hard. "And now you can see exactly what you threw away for someone who never gave a damn about you." Lisa collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, my anger slowly giving way to an emptiness I couldn't describe. "I'll have the divorce papers ready by next week," I said finally. "You can keep the house." "I don't want it." "John, please," she begged, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll do anything." But it was too late. I turned and walked out the door, leaving her to face the fallout of her choices alone. The first few days after leaving Lisa were surreal. I stayed in a small rental apartment near downtown Dallas, furnished just enough to make it livable. The walls felt bare, the space foreign, but at least it was mine. Lisa called almost daily at first, leaving tearful voicemails and long, apologetic texts. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Even if I wanted to forgive her, the damage was done. I couldn't unsee the betrayal or the man she betrayed me with. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing. Some piece of the puzzle I hadn't yet uncovered. One afternoon, Rick called again. "Got something interesting for you," he said. "Thought you might want to know." I sighed, already bracing myself. "What now?" "Well, I've been looking into Ethan, like you asked. Turns out the guy has a bit of a history with this kind of thing. He's been in and out of relationships for years, mostly women he can manipulate or use. But here's the kicker. He's been bragging about you." "Bragging?" I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "Yeah. A mutual acquaintance overheard him talking at a bar. Apparently, he only got back in touch with Lisa to mess with you. He's got some kind of grudge. Says you stole her from him, and he wanted to even the score." My stomach twisted as Rick's words sank in. This wasn't just about Lisa's betrayal anymore. Ethan had orchestrated the whole thing, playing on her insecurities to drive a wedge between us. The realization filled me with a fresh wave of anger. But this time, it wasn't just directed at Lisa. The next time Lisa called, I picked up. "John?" she said, her voice hesitant, almost disbelieving. "We need to talk," I said. There was a long pause before she responded. "Okay. When?" "Tonight," I said. "Your place." When I arrived at the house, Lisa looked like she'd been through hell. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, and her eyes swollen from crying. She ushered me inside, her hands fidgeting nervously as she led me to the living room. "I didn't think you'd ever speak to me again," she said softly. I sat down across from her, my expression unreadable. "I spoke to Rick," I said. "He found out some interesting things about Ethan." Her face fell. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's been using you," I said bluntly. "He never cared about you, Lisa. He just wanted to screw with me. This whole thing was some kind of sick revenge for our marriage." Lisa stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she didn't know how to process what I was saying. "No," she said finally, shaking her head. "That's not true. Ethan wouldn't. He would." I cut her off. "And he did. You were just a pawn to him, Lisa. A way to hurt me. And you fell for it." Tears welled in her eyes again. But this time, there was no anger in me to soften the blow. Just a cold, hard truth she needed to face. "How could I be so stupid?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought he cared." I leaned back in my chair, watching her crumble under the weight of her own choices. "That's the thing about people like Ethan," I said. "They make you think they care until they get what they want. And then they leave you to pick up the pieces." Over the next hour, Lisa poured out everything, the texts, the meetings, the hotel. She admitted to feeling flattered by Ethan's attention, drawn to the nostalgia of their past, but swore she hadn't slept with him. "It doesn't matter," I said finally. "Whether it was physical or not, the betrayal is the same. You lied to me. You let him come between us." She didn't argue. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to fully understand the depth of what she'd done. "Is there any way we can fix this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the chance to make things right. But deep down, I knew the trust we'd built over 8 years was gone. "No," I said quietly. "I can't come back from this." Her sobs filled the room as I stood to leave. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Lisa kept the house as I'd promised, while I moved into a modest apartment closer to work. I heard through mutual friends that she started seeing a therapist, trying to piece her life back together. As for Ethan, I never saw him again. But Rick told me he'd been dumped by Marissa shortly after our confrontation, his games catching up to him at last. In the end, the pain faded, replaced by a sense of clarity. The man I was before all this naive trusting was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth. Lisa and I hadn't spoken since the divorce, but I hoped she found what she was looking for, even if it wasn't with me. And as for me, I was finally free.